the bell ringer, which connected to our activities yesterday. There's lots of those videos that we watched. Then the first item there, Unit 2, Journal 2, it asks, what do you already know about 9/11, or what did you already know about 9/11? Just 2 sentences on that. And then what did you learn about 9/11? So things we've done in the bell ringer over the last couple of days will help you with that. Just for 2 sentences on what you already knew, on what you learned. And that is for Unit 2, Journal 2. So that is what you can have some time on to work first. And make sure that you proofread. The notes today that we start on in about 25 minutes will be on the war on terror, particularly Afghanistan. Tomorrow we'll look at the war in Iraq. And if you get done early with the journal, the other item that we'll have time on in the second half of class, but you can start on it in the first half if you get done early, would be, it's titled Unit 2, War on Terror. Let me take you through that. This will be worth a project grade. And this is to help summarize the information we learned from this week, but also to show you the proper format to put together a presentation. But if you look at the War on Terror there, and there's a link to the Google slideshow, it says up there, of course, that you need to click File and make a copy. So you need to actually do that for yourself. And then replace all this text here with your first and last name. On the second slide, that's where you'll need to enter some information on 9/11. And you can see the instructions there. It says, with number 1, replace these instructions with 5 significant points about 9/11. Do not use complete sentences. Use a fragmented sentence like a newspaper headline. Capitalize the first word and proper nouns. Because when you give a presentation, you shouldn't have full sentences, because then it just turns into a reading lesson for everybody. So you should just have headlines, really, of the most significant points that you learned about 9/11. And for instance, you could put something like both towers collapsed by the time that they did, or the number of casualties, or Flight 93 crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. So those would be, for instance, headlines you would see in the newspaper, short, brief statements. And so 5 of those that you would replace here on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, it gives you the instructions where you would click Insert and then go to Image and search the web and choose an appropriate picture about 9/11. So up here in the search bar, you type 9/11 and then scroll through and pick whatever you think is best and replace all this text here, the instructions, and fit it into this box. Once you click on one of them, once you choose one, then you just click Insert and it will come open, and then you'll just have to resize it to replace this pane over here. So do that for 9/11, and then the other 2 slides, this one's for war in Afghanistan, which we'll go over in the notes today, and then the war in Iraq right here. This is a project, and so it won't be due until, even though it's in the Unit 2 module, it's not due until February the 12th. So not this Friday, but next. So next week we'll do a study guide, we'll do a review. You have more time to work on this, and we'll take the test next week. So each of those test weeks, those are the things that we'll do. But sometimes I'll get you started a little bit early so you have some more time. So in the meantime, right now, what you can do is go to that Unit 2, Journal 2, and go ahead and answer that prompt. Unit 2, Journal 2. Just click Submit, and a text box will open up, and you answer the questions what did you already know in 2 sentences, and what did you learn. And if you get done with that early, you can go ahead and start on that project, or you can go back if you didn't finish the reading it and do that instead, or you can take the quizzes, whichever one of those that you want to work on. Does anybody have any questions? So now let's look at the notes. So we'll cover 3 items today. Just a little bit of background on Afghanistan, the initial effort that the United States undertook, and then the ongoing issues. Because if you look up the War on Terror, you'll see it says 2001 to the present. So it's still going on. So let's just talk about the background first. I mean, this might sound a little familiar, but if you go back in time, the country of Afghanistan was divided between empires, constantly shifting empires back and forth. So it was divided between empires. And when it first kind of started to look like Afghanistan was between 1823 and 1926. So 1823 to 1926, it will actually become what is called an emirate. So 1823 to 1926, it was an emirate, which is spelled Emirate. Emirate. That's 1823 to 1926. An emirate is just a Muslim Arabic way of titling a kingdom, basically. You'll see one of the countries on the Arabian Peninsula is the United Arab Emirates because it's a group of little kingdoms. But the emirate, Emirate, from 1823 to 1826, will be a type of kingdom that is heavily influenced by the British. So heavily influenced by the British. So the emirate, 1823 to 1926, was heavily influenced by the British. 1926.
How do you spell emirate again?
Emirate. Emirate. So, even though it was its own little emirate, its own type of kingdom, it was, of course, influenced by the British. So they weren't truly independent. They would become their own kingdom starting in 1926 up through 1973. 1926 to 1973, they would be their own kingdom. 1926 to 1973. It serves as a buffer between British and Russian territories. It serves as a buffer between British and Russian territories. Buffer just means like a middle protection zone that keeps two sides apart. So it's a buffer between Britain and Russian territories. And then after that, there's a little bit of instability, and we know what happens. We've already talked about this. Their war with the Soviets is from 79 to 89. So they have their war with the Soviets. 79 to 1989. Well, we know, of course, that the rebels won. They beat the Soviets. So the rebels won. And if you look up here, this is a series of maps starting in 1992 to 2001 when the United States ended up attacking. Each of these different colored areas is a different group that controlled territories inside Afghanistan. And eventually, we'd see this lighter colored green kind of explode and take over a huge area. This lighter colored green will be the Taliban. So the Taliban took control starting in 1996. You can see they control a majority of the country. So the Taliban, starting in 1996, would control a majority. And they're a relatively new group because this map from 1992, they're not on it. So this one here in the bottom left-hand corner is from early 2001, before the war in Afghanistan started. At the time, the United States were allies with this red group up here known as the Northern Alliance because they're in the northernmost part of the country. But at the time, we said there's too many problems in the Middle East, too much violence. So why don't you just make peace with the Taliban and try to rule Afghanistan together? We really didn't want to get involved in any type of conflict. That was early, though. Then, of course, 9/11 happened. And so the second item, of course, is our initial effort. Initial effort. And we already mentioned yesterday the Taliban condemned 9/11, but of course they didn't want to hand over bin Laden. They refused to do that. What they wanted was all of the evidence to prove that Osama bin Laden was behind it. And even then, they only wanted to turn him over to a third party. They didn't want to turn him over directly to the United States. So they wanted all the evidence, and they wanted to turn him over to someone else. So on October 7th of that year, 2001, October 7th, 2001, we started to invade. It began with airstrikes, heavy airstrikes and bombardments of Taliban forces, and then eventually the landing of troops. So October 7th, 2001 began our invasion. Since we conquered the capital city by November 12th, does anybody know the name of the capital city of Afghanistan? Anybody ever vacationed there? Nobody? The capital city of Afghanistan. Starts with a K. It's Kabul. 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 It's a lovely city, especially in the summer. But anyway, the capital fell by November the 12th, and most of the country was conquered by mid-2002. So most of the country was conquered by mid-2002. Is that a big deal? Isn't it a small country and we took it over easily? Well, it is smaller than the United States, but it's about the same size as the entire Northeast. So Maine down to West Virginia, over to Michigan, and so on. So it's a pretty considerable area. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, it has lots of mountains and caves and things like that. And so it's not all hospitable territory either. But we did end up conquering it by mid 2002. A temporary government was created. And a new constitution was approved by 2004. So they have a parliament, they have a president, they have elections, they have all that stuff. New constitution approved by 2004. New constitution approved by 2004. And the last of the three items, ongoing issues. Obviously, we still have troops there. Many people might wonder why. First, they have what is called a decentralized government. Decentralized government. In other words, it's not very powerful. It's not very strong. It's decentralized. There's a lot of local control. So local people, they're often called warlords, people that are incredibly powerful, have their own militias. So local control. What that means, of course, is that there's opportunity for corruption and power changes easily. One warlord could become more powerful, another one less, territory shift back and forth. So there's the opportunity for corruption and power changes easily. So in other words, is it a secure system that once we pack up and leave, the Taliban will leave it alone? And the answer is no. Its economy relies heavily on agriculture. They don't have a lot of manufacturing. They can't make a lot of their own manufactured goods. And so that means they need to have alliances with other countries. They need to trade. And one incredibly profit crop there, of course, is illegal. Does anybody know what the most profitable crop in Afghanistan is? Opium, yes. So opium, and both the Taliban and the United States are opposed to that. So farmers often find themselves in a tough spot. And of course, one of the things that makes it worse off, and you can find this consistently with other countries like it, is that it is landlocked. It has no access to ocean or sea. And so that's another reason why trade doesn't do very well with Afghanistan, because it's much tougher for them to get goods in and out of the country. So they are landlocked. And just two other things to mention. One of their neighbors is Pakistan. And the Taliban, the other country that it exists in besides Afghanistan, is Pakistan. So whenever we did chase most of the Taliban out of Afghanistan, they just went across the border into that same mountainous, cave-filled region of Pakistan and hid there instead. In fact, that's where we eventually have found people from Al-Qaeda too, like Osama bin Laden. So they neighbor Pakistan, and of course, Taliban leaders have been hiding there. And quite predictably, as each time we withdraw troops, we withdraw 1,000 here, 2,000 there, 4,000 there, 1,000 the next year. Every time we reduce the amount of troops, of course, more Taliban members start coming back across the border into the country. And so the Taliban actually controls a considerable portion along the Pakistan border right now. Of course, the American people don't want to spend eternity there. So the United States has tried negotiating with the Taliban, But of course, that's difficult because they use things like terrorist tactics. They definitely don't believe in the equality of women. Women have to stay home, have to be completely covered head to toe, are not allowed to drive or go to school. And so it's obviously not a good situation for half the population if the Taliban ends up taking over. And they've already proven before that they will willingly hide terrorists like Osama bin Laden. So the problem is, once we withdraw, it can become a problem all over again. So does that mean we need to keep troops there forever? I don't know. It depends. If the Afghan people can care enough to keep their country in order, and they have people that serve in their own military that end up fighting the Taliban and their own police force that search for terrorists. So they do have lots of people that are willing to do that. But the problem is a lot of them are just poor farmers trying to make ends meet, and they really don't care who's in charge. And so if the Americans come rolling through one day and the Taliban comes rolling through the next day, they say, fine, just don't steal any of my stuff. So there's a lot of people that are just apathetic and aren't concerned whichever way it goes. Apparently, they don't care enough about their daughters and wives to do anything about stopping the Taliban. So that's one of the problems and why we still have troops here, while we'll probably continue to have at least one base in Kabul for decades to come.